I'll never forget the last beer I had before I left Chengdu. It was this cheap poor man's label kind of beer called Zwewa, or a snowflake. It's ironic, really. Such a unique name for something mass-produced. The bottles are all the same. It all tastes the same. The most unique thing about it is the price. And yet, I haven't had one for years. I'd like to say I left because of work, but that's only half true. The real truth is, as with most things, complicated. Bear with me. It's a long story. I'm a private investigator. Not really by choice, but a long set of circumstances. Being a private investigator in southwest China is a bit of a gray area, but a job is a job. In many ways, the job picked me rather than the other way around. I was originally going to work in finance, on my father's behalf, but he fell on hard times. He worked in foreign investment, but when the company had to downsize, he was the first to go. After that, I had to pick up whatever jobs I could to keep the family afloat. I was supposed to be my family's pride and joy, but that never happened. I didn't meet anyone to start a family with. I couldn't keep up my studies and work at the same time. Every job interview failed, and I was passed over at every opportunity. Every time things looked like they were going my way, something would happen. An accident, a sudden twist of fate, someone changing their mind. But there was a single stroke of luck that turned things around. I won a raffle. There was a small electronics fair near Tianfu Square that held it. I was just there to buy some batteries and a new alarm clock, but they had a sign up where you could write your name down and have a chance to win a brand new camera. A real fancy one with a tripod, 3 kinds of lenses, a bag, memory cards, the whole deal. I wrote down my name on a whim and didn't think anything else of it. About a month later, I won. That camera turned everything around. I took pictures of everything, and I got pretty good at it. I followed tutorials online, joined a couple of forums, and even entered a few contests, 2 of which I won. I dare say that being a photographer is my greatest quality, but it's not the best profession. You don't bring in a lot of money. I did a couple of commercial shoots, portraits, and photo prints, but the real money came from other sources. It started with a man who needed proof that his daughter was seeing someone in secret. He needed photographic evidence to show his wife. It was all pretty sketchy, but he'd worked with me a couple of times, and he knew I was trustworthy. I turned him down 3 times, but on the 4th time he offered me such a large sum that I couldn't say no. So, I did it. It's surprisingly easy to find and follow people nowadays. I know, it's creepy, but I was just doing it for the money. I'm not a creepy person. That job turned out to be a dud. Turns out she wasn't seeing anyone. She was just a shopaholic. She blasted through her allowance on clothes and accessories, and not even the good ones. She hid most of it at a friend's house. But that opportunity sparked a whole bunch of other jobs. Mostly parents asking me to keep an eye on their adult children, but also a couple of spouses worried about infidelity. That was most of my work for a long time. I was the eye in the sky. I walked the streets of Chengdu since I was a kid. I knew them by heart. Didn't matter if it was the busiest street on the Spring Festival. I'd get around, no problem. I knew the best place to get bingfen in the summer, and I could make my way across town with my eyes closed. It'd only take a heartbeat or 2 for me to spot a tourist in the crowd. I've always had a good eye for noticing things that stand out. But then I got a job. The biggest job I'd ever gotten. I'd been working as a private investigator for about 6 years when I got the email. They'd heard about me from a common friend, and they needed to remain anonymous. Someone close to them had gone missing, and they were very worried about what might have happened. They had talked to the police, but there had been no progress, and no one was telling them anything. So they decided to look elsewhere. Specifically, to me. I'd never had a missing person job before, but I could hardly say no. No matter if I found this person or not, These people were willing to pay me a retainer fee, meaning it wasn't just a chunk of cash at the end of the job, but an ongoing payment for as long as it took me to find answers. I thought about it and ultimately accepted. I'd been working small jobs for years, but this time I could really help someone. It wasn't just money. They sent over everything they had about the missing person, a woman named Leanne. She was almost 80 years old and lived alone in the south part of town. She'd been gone for weeks, and the police hadn't found any clues. Her close friends and family had, however, noticed something unusual. She left her bag behind, the email said. Leanne never leaves her bag behind. But it didn't stop there. The only thing that remained in that bag was a list. It had dates, numbers, and nonsensical text. Something cryptic. This sparked something in me. As I said, I've always had a good eye for when something stands out. For the first few days on the job, it took some time to get acquainted with Leanne's life. I walked the streets where she lived. I visited the closest shops and restaurants. But no matter where I went, no one understood who I was talking about. No one seemed to know her. It's as if Leanne never left her home. But how can someone never leave their home and still go missing? While I couldn't check her home without raising suspicion, I took some time to talk to her neighbors. They had nothing but good things to say. Leanne was quiet and kept to herself. Most of them couldn't even picture her in their mind. A couple of the older men were much more interested in talking about a caretaker that would drop by every now and then. A woman who was described as pale as the moon, with the reddest lips you've ever seen. I couldn't find anything about this supposed caretaker, so I had to pin that for later. I figured that maybe it was the caretaker who'd hired me to begin with. By the time I got my first payment, I was stuck. Every track, every trace, led to nothing. Leanne was a mystery. I didn't know what to do. I figured I was about to lose this gig. I took a trip to the Tianfu Square station and got myself a snowflake. I usually saved them for after the job was done, but I figured I'd cut myself some slack. And hey, I'd just gotten paid. I was sitting at the edge of the fountain, looking up at the golden spiral. It stood out against the dark of the night sky like a string of golden hair. I thought that maybe reading that strange document in a new setting, with new light, might kick gears in my mind around. Cars raced past on the streets above. Tired workers rested their feet after a long day. Everyone was checking their phones, minding their own business. I could have been naked and no one would have noticed. Well, except for one man. He was exceptionally well dressed and had a beer of his own, a much more expensive brand. He sat down next to me and I could see him swaying a bit. I think he'd had a few too many. I smiled at him and turned my attention back to the document as I finished my snowflake. "You shouldn't take that home," he said. "That's for work." "Excuse me?" "It's for work," he repeated, pointing at the document. "You shouldn't take that home." "You know what this is?" "Yeah," he nodded. "From the planner's office. The archives." "That's what this is?" "Yeah," he smiled. "It's references, see?" He pointed to the numbers and letters, letting out a long groan. "Here," he said. "That's 40 years old at least. That's the archive. There's the security clearance." "So they're documents," I interrupted. "Can I just go get them?" "Of course," he said. "That's what that slip is for. How don't you know that?" I hurried away as he laughed it off. I couldn't believe my luck. Once again, it felt like I was back on the right path. I was often so unlucky about so many things. But sometimes, things like this would fall out of the sky. Count your blessings. The next day, I went to the planner's office and asked them about the slip. I was scolded a bit for taking it home, but I was free to check the documents as long as I left the paper slip behind. I didn't mind. I'd taken plenty of pictures of it. I had to sign in at the desk and accept the conditions of use. as well as leave my phone behind, but then I was free to look. A middle-aged woman showed me to an archive room on the second basement floor. Row after row of poorly kept paper records in open-topped yellow boxes. I could almost smell the beetles feasting on forgotten protocols. One by one, she showed me the documents I'd requested. I don't think she cared very much. It was all old news. None of the papers had any kind of security clearance. I was left alone with a dozen files, all neatly protected with plastic folders and marked with pink strips of paper. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep these in good condition. At first, I didn't notice anything in particular. It was confirmations about everything from traffic signs to road maintenance. Nothing fancy. A couple of notices about street cleaning and planting of trees. There were also meeting protocols. But again, my good eye saved me. I noticed something peculiar. In every document, there were a few sentences that just didn't make sense. As most protocols were handwritten, it was easy to miss, but you could tell part of it was written afterwards. There was a different ink. I sat there a whole day, trying to piece it together. Then I came to think of something. The pink paper. They looked like something you might just use to tag an important part, but they were all different lengths. Looking a little closer, each of them had the length of one word from each document. At the final added section, it was ingenious. Piecing every word together, it spelled out another file for me to request. And a message. One day, the Beast King will kill me. What the hell? That evening, I went by the fountain at Tianfu Square Station again. This time, not to feel sorry for myself, but to calm my nerves. It felt like I was chasing something, and that final warning sent chills down my spine. I sat down by the fountain with another snowflake. Then, the strangest thing happened. The same man I'd seen the other day walked by again. I waved at him, but he turned away. Maybe he was too sober to remember me. But that's not what it looked like. I have a good eye, and I know what I saw. That wasn't a man not remembering. That was a man trying to look like he didn't remember. That didn't help my nerves. I didn't finish my snowflake. The next few days, I went on a wild goose chase. I went back to the office and signed in again to get the final document. That, in turn, had another code, and a couple more references. These would send me to bureaucrats all over the city, everywhere from the library to the Ministry of Transport. Sometimes I'd have to soften a few pockets. But these documents were old and useless. There were more warnings along the way, though, hidden in plain sight. Don't let the Beast King see you. At every office I went to, I showed them the article numbers, the codes, and I made the right request. A couple of receptionists had to check with their supervisors, but eventually they all gave me the go-ahead. I was given file after file after file, all with pink slips of paper and handwritten notes. Some were as much as 50 years old, while others had been written just a couple of years prior. But nowhere did they mention Leanne, or her work. It was as if I was chasing a ghost. With every document, a new hidden message. Warnings. I collected them and sorted them by date. Eventually, I got something interesting. Longer, more cohesive messages. One day, the broken one will kill me, it read. But I will prepare, and I will not go willingly. There will be others. If you are informed, please listen. Don't let the Beast King see you. Don't let him dissuade you. Don't come find me. He will be looking for you. And at the very end, a reference to a book at the public library. That night, as I stopped by Tianfu Square Station, I didn't see that man. It was strange. A salaryman like that doesn't stop taking the same way home in the middle of a work week. There was something off about it. The secret message tickled my mind, making me look over my shoulder 1 or 2 times too many. The Beast King. What did that mean? Now, I might just be thinking about it all too much, but that night I thought I saw something. There were more people on the street corners than usual, more cars on the road, and as I lay my head to rest that night, I had a missed call on my phone from an unknown number. Someone was looking my way. I made my way to the library the next day. I talked to a young man and showed him the book reference number, and he gave me a curious look. Apparently, it was an older title. "You have to sign in," he said, "and you have to be careful not to break it." "But I can see it?" I asked. "Yeah, but you can't take it home." "Fair enough." He led me to a room in the back, where books were kept in an archive rather than bookshelves. Some of these dated back almost 100 years, maybe older. As he searched, he made a little small talk. "I don't think I've ever seen someone read this," he chuckled. "You read a lot of children's stories?" "Not really," I said. "So this is a children's story?" "Don't you know that?" he huffed. "How'd you get this?" "Friend of a friend." I shrugged. "Not sure what I'm looking at." "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for." He handed me an old leather-bound book. A little pink paper poked out of it. The young man was about to pull it out, but I stopped him, taking the book from him. "Thank you," I smiled. "I'll take care of that. You don't want to damage the paper if there's glue on the slip." He smiled and nodded, leaving me to read the book in peace. It was titled Important Stories for Children, by an author called E.A. Rask. It had been translated by hand to Chinese, but it was originally written in English. It was a series of stories about talking animals on various adventures. Foxes and badgers, caribous and elephants. One was about a moth who wanted to be a boy. But the pink paper showed the start of the final story. The story about an animal no one knew the name of. An animal who'd come from a forest far, far away. An animal who'd had its horns broken, teeth shattered, and who was left to die in the snow. It was gruesome in a way. The animal was described as a king of beasts that had lost its palace. It used to be the king of the forest, but that forest was gone, and it had no friends left. It was going to die, starving to death in the winter of a foreign world. That is, until a rabbit came along. "Promise to be my friend," the Beast King said. "Promise, and we'll play forever." "I promise," said the rabbit. "But you can't be Beast King here. You could only be our friend." And the Beast King agreed. The story showed how the beast regained its strength. The rabbit would be his friend, sharing food to survive the winter. The beast grew its horns. It grew talons longer than the trees, and it grew teeth sharper than steel. It was the most powerful being, able to eat and kill anything, and anyone, anywhere. But it had promised to be a friend, and it could not lie. As long as that rabbit was there, it would be a friend, not a king. The beast and rabbit would play for years, but the beast grew restless. It wanted to be king again, but could not break its promise. Then it came up with a clever plan. It would ask the other animals to kill the rabbit, thus releasing him from his promise. It would plot and scheme, asking the other animals to hunt and kill. But only the most ruthless creatures would accept. The killers, the predators, the bloodthirsty and starved. So the rabbit would hide. It dug its burrow deeper than any other rabbit had, for it knew that as long as the beast was bound to its promise, it could harm no one else. So the rabbit dug deep and prayed for a harsh winter. And that's where the story ended. It was tragic in a way. Not at all like the plays we'd see at the Spring Festival when I was a kid. Using the pink paper, I scanned the pages over and over for words that fit. Finally, it revealed a short message, clipped between 2 sentences. I am the rabbit. That had to be it. A message, perhaps, from Leanne. Was her disappearance linked to this children's tale? That thought made me pause. I thought back on what the librarian had said, that he'd never seen anyone read it. There had to be records about people asking for it, though. But who? And when? Someone must have put that paper slip in. After asking the librarian nicely and slipping him a couple of bills, he agreed to help. He was sure that no one had ever asked for that book. But looking at the register, he found that there was someone who'd accessed it previously, just a couple of months ago. Strange, he admitted. There's no name, just a registry of access to it. So you don't know who read it? Well, it has to be. He scratched his head and looked around. Then he leaned in. It must have been someone who worked here, he whispered. And I think I know who. For a couple more bills, he handed me the name and address to a woman who used to work at the library. She'd quit around the time this book had been accessed. He described her as young and beautiful, with the reddest lips he'd ever seen. Now at this point, I was too enthralled to see the bigger picture. I didn't think much about what the story literally meant. I just wanted to know what happened to Leanne. If it was like in the story, it seemed that the beast had finally killed the rabbit. But what did that mean? What did that translate to in the real world? So I chased another trail, this time for the mysterious woman. Her address turned out to be a fake, but I found a drop-off spot for mail. From there, I found a forwarding address that led me right back to the start. Leanne's home. I'd walked one giant circle around myself, ending up back where I began. Going back to Leanne's neighborhood, I talked to her neighbors again. This time, I asked more about the supposed caretaker. While no one had any idea about whether or not she was a caretaker, a lot of people talked about a beautiful woman with red lips. You can't miss her, an old man said. No one could. Never seen anything like her, another said. It's like the sun couldn't touch her. Beauty like that never dies. That struck a chord in me. Because, just as no one had seen the elderly Leanne, people hadn't seen the young woman for some time either. Perhaps she too was missing. I wanted to go loud with this one. I wanted to call out her name and see what popped up, but I tried to keep quiet. I kept that thought in mind, that someone was watching, that I shouldn't let them see. So I tried to keep it cool and search in less suspicious ways. I would lie, bribe, and trick my way forward, as to not draw too much attention. Her given name was May, so I tried to talk about her casually, as if we knew each other. I had her full name, but I think it was a fake. It didn't show up anywhere. I checked every kind of public record I could get my hands on, but nothing seemed to correspond with her information. At least, nothing in the nearby area. That is, until I checked with the local morgue. Turns out, May had passed away. I went to the morgue under the guise of being a worried cousin, there to pick up her things and sign her papers. Apparently they'd been looking for her family for some time, and they needed someone to sign for her things. The attendant I talked to was exhausted and overworked, and didn't care much for protocol. He escorted me to the morgue without much fanfare. I was handed a box of things, and he pulled out a cloth-covered slab. Can I have some privacy? I asked. To say goodbye, I mean. Of course, he said. Just sign the papers. Thought no one was coming to claim her. She's been here a while. He handed me a bunch of papers to sign. There were tons of questions, but he told me to skip to the final page. I signed it and handed it back. And a final thumbprint, he added. Here? I rolled my eyes and went ahead with it, staining my thumb with red ink. Finally, the attendant threw his arms up in surrender. "All yours," he sighed. "Put her to rest." Before I looked through her box of things, I wanted to see her. The mysterious woman I'd been chasing, which would lead me to Leanne. There had to be a piece of the puzzle here somewhere. I pulled back the white sheet and opened her body bag, expecting something horrifying. But there she was, like a porcelain doll. The reddest lips I'd ever seen, even in death. She was barely in her 20s, but she had this timeless look that reminded me of a statue. I could tell why people would remember her. I would too. I heard something. It started with a crack in the concrete wall. I thought there was an earthquake. Then, the lights flickered and went out, leaving me in the dark. I held the box of May's belongings close to my chest like a child with a toy. There was another crack in the wall, as loud as a gunshot. Then, screaming. I'd never heard anything like it. It was like a choir screaming all at once. 100 people in pain. 1,000. Like they'd been set on fire, begging for their lives. And behind it all, a rumbling murmur. A sound so deep and dark that the resonance shook the walls. The lights blinked. For a heartbeat, I saw the dead woman. Her head turned my way. Her red lips parted in a final word. Dead, dust-covered eyes looking into and past me. "Rabbit." The lights came back on. Every door wide open. Cloth-covered slabs all around the room. An overhead light hung by a frayed cable. There were cracks in the walls, and water flowing from a busted pipe. The attendant came running down the stairs. "What happened?" he yelled. "What is this?" I didn't know what to answer. I'd forgotten to breathe. I was feeling lightheaded. "What did you do?" he insisted. "Where is she?" The body was gone. Only dust remained. People came rushing down to fix the pipes and clean the mess. I managed to slip away in the commotion. I hurried back home to check out May's items in private. I tried to think of something else. She couldn't have looked at me. She couldn't have talked. It was all make-believe. But then again, I have a good eye, and I know what I saw. Looking through her box, I was a bit perplexed. There were files, pictures, receipts. It looked like she'd cleared out her desk. There were a few paychecks from her part-time position at the library, so it was clear that I'd gotten the right person. The first thing I noticed was a crumpled-up card. She'd wanted to wish her coworkers a prosperous new year, but she'd made a mistake of signing it and threw it away. She'd accidentally signed it Leanne. Were Leanne and May the same person? But how could that be? Leanne was almost 80 years old, and May could not have been older than 20. There were pictures of May in various fashions from decades ago, all without aging a day. Her whole life was recorded in that box. Black and white pictures, Polaroids, even a small painting. People through the years had all wanted to depict her. Her most recent pictures were in front of the library, with a text on the back. Next time, I'll be Kian. If she really was the rabbit in that story, I could understand why she'd kept away. Not only were there things out to kill her, but she was easily recognizable. A fake name and a couple of false trails could throw something off for a bit. But for how long? She dug that burrow deep, that's for sure. There was so much more. Letters from old friends, receipts from trips abroad, notebooks with names, places, dates, and snippets of curious information. "Can get you a passport," one note said. "Can get you to Europe," said another. Most of the names had been crossed out over the years. But then there was something at the bottom of the box. Something that looked oddly familiar. An advertisement for a camera. It was the same camera as the one I'd won in that raffle years ago. There was a receipt for it. There were notes about talking to a store manager. There was a sign-up sheet with my name on it. And only my name. Her receipts, pictures, and notes all told a different story. How she had noticed a curious child at the spring festival. How she'd had his father lose his job so he wouldn't move away. How she'd sabotaged every job opportunity to keep the child on a path of her choosing, leading him to a path of investigation and puzzle solving. How she'd given him a camera. How she'd suggested for people to hire him. It was all a backup plan for something that might not even happen. Her sudden death. The Beast King found his loophole. A note read, "Kill the rabbit and the contract is broken." But the rabbit found a loophole too. It could give away its blessing to another. I could feel myself sweating. This wasn't just her life. She was telling me about mine. All he has to do is to sign the contract. She'd been in this town for years, leaving little marks, poking things in certain directions, only to leave them for years. She'd made sure that papers would have to be signed at the right time and place. But they hadn't just been sign-up sheets. They'd been planted and planned long in advance. He must bind himself to another. The sign-up sheet at the electronics store. One signature. He must believe. The sign-in at the local office. 2 signatures. He must play forever. Ageless. The sign-in at the library. 3 signatures. He will take my place and retain my given gift. The release form at the morgue. 4 signatures and a print. And there, at the very bottom, "I'm sorry," a note read. "I was careless. I thought I would be safe just this once. I was wrong. And now we must all suffer. Please remember, there must always be a rabbit." My head was spinning. I was involved. I'd always been involved. Looking at my phone, I scrolled back to the email that I'd been sent. I tried to reply, only to receive notice that the email couldn't be delivered. The user was unavailable. Gone. There were bank statements about automatic payments to my account. She must have known they were getting close, and she kicked her backup plan into action. She threw out the first breadcrumb, and hoped I would follow. Of course I would. She'd made sure of it. She'd always made sure of it. She'd tricked me. She had made me sign up to take her place. But this could only mean one thing. That something was coming for me. Whatever that entailed. I boxed it all up and walked up to my fridge. I cracked open the last snowflake and chugged it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't feel any different. But looking at my reflection in the bottle, I saw something I didn't recognize. Looking up at my kitchen window, I saw myself. I looked at least 10 years younger. My hair was more vibrant. My eyes were darker. And as I watched, my skin turned pale. The walls rumbled, just like they'd done in the morgue. Distant screams, a dark murmur, as from a waking beast. One of my paintings fell from the wall, and the pipes in my bathroom burst with a violent pop. I had to leave. I had to take what I could, and burrow deep. I hurried outside. I could see people in the corner of my eye. When I looked at them directly, they were just people. An old man reading under a streetlight. young women talking on the phone, a man waiting for a bus. But I have good eyes. The moment I looked away, I'd see them change. Eyes growing larger, backs hunching over, fingers growing longer, and smiles twisting into snarling grins. If I listened closely, I could hear that rumbling in the distance growing closer. A furious, growling beast, and the hungering things that followed. I tried not to run, but it was hard. I could feel them looking at me. My neck felt cold and exposed as the hairs on my arm reached for the sky. I tried to remember what I'd read, but it was just words. I couldn't put it together. No, I had to stop thinking and start doing. I would have to do what Leanne had done. To disappear and leave no trace. I could hear sirens in the distance. Someone yelled at me from across the street. Then someone did it again. Then it wasn't a yell anymore, but a yelp. But I knew those streets better than they did. Leanne had chosen well. I ran down the back alleys. I'd see things climb out of windows and crawl along the rooftops. I'd hear them rustling through garbage and breaking down doors. They had caught a whiff of me, and they weren't going to stop. They were getting closer. Screams turning into howls. Laughter turning into snarls. Panting, drooling, scratching, growling. Dark things at every turn. Around every corner. Waiting for me to walk into their maws. My heart was beating out of my chest as I ran. If I stopped, I was dead. Then I was surrounded. There was a four-way alley, and I could hear them at every turn. So I had to hide and hope. I dove headfirst into a trash container, hiding underneath a sticky black bag. I heard something gallop past me, then suddenly stop. There was barking, like two sick dogs threatening each other. Then a third joined in, a fourth. I heard a door being ripped open, and a man gasping. There was this terrible screech, like a dying pig. Then nothing. After a breath of silence, all hell broke loose. They were everywhere looking for me. They turned the nearby houses upside down, going door to door. One of them ripped open a car and turned it inside out, walking across the roof with the feet of a bird. I heard glass breaking, doors slamming, screams, tearing fabric, and broken bones. They were enraged beasts, refusing to back down, refusing to starve any longer. At some point in the chaos, they knocked the container over. I rolled out onto the street. I dunked my face into a puddle, only to realize it was warm. Blood. I took a gamble. I figured they wouldn't check the same place twice, so I crawled into the first door I saw. The lights had gone out, but there was a dinner table in the back. I felt something warm and wet on the floor as my hand slipped, spraining my wrist. I could taste iron in the air. Then I bumped into something on the floor. A still body, but small. I hid under that dinner table as I listened. I tried not to breathe, but I couldn't stop gasping for air. My cheeks felt like they were on fire, but my body was shivering. In the little flashes from the struggling light posts outside, I saw everything. I couldn't help it. I saw the broken spines, the dismembered arms. I saw the long claw marks dragged across the wall, still dripping with gore. I cursed these good eyes. Sirens came closer. Snarls turned to laughter. Growls turned to sighs. And what remained were words. "Took you long enough, officer," a man snarled. "Now seal this whole building off." I don't know how I got out. I think they were checking for bodies in the adjacent alley when I left. I went the other way, listening for sirens and howls. But I got further and further away, and after a couple of hours, I was long gone. But even then, I could hear the growling of a furious creature somewhere in the distance. I haven't been back since. I've talked to no one, and I've left no trail. There was money in that box of things, and it got me pretty far. I won't say how far, for obvious reasons. But what I can say is, I took Leanne's lesson to heart. I've dug my burrow deep. I dream of that thing sometimes. In a way, I'm bound to it. I see it as this shapeless enormity in a desolate world, surrounded by these twisted blue flowers. It reaches for the moon, a crown, but it can't quite reach. Not yet, at least. But I think those weeks when Leanne was gone, and there was no replacement, awakened something. A yearning for a freedom lost, perhaps. But a loophole for a loophole. She didn't need to be alive for me to agree. I see them every now and then. I understand now why Leanne rarely went outside. There's a few in every town, it seems. Maybe it's the same ones. Maybe they're just bad people acting on instinct. Maybe they really are monsters. I don't know. But I can't pretend like they're not real. I can't go home. My face was plastered on the news, and 6 people died. I don't think I'll find myself in Tianfu Square Station with a snowflake anytime soon. I have to walk different streets, and hope I know them well enough to run when the time comes. Curses can look like blessings. To be beautiful and ageless. What does that really mean? I stick out in every crowd. My hair never grows. Every imperfection burns. My blood is a little redder. It smells strange. Sweet almost. It makes you want to lick it. Like a soothing dessert. I have only myself to blame, I suppose. I've signed the terms and conditions.
Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.